this evening is a very special one because we are going to invite you to meet New Haven's mayor-elect, first woman in 375 years to be elected mayor of New Haven, and also the first African-American woman. We've had one African-American before, in 1989, John Daniels was elected mayor, and now we have the Venerable State Senator Toni Harp. As of January 2nd, she'll be Mayor Toni Harp. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I am delighted. And I want to introduce the rest of the panel. To my right is Paul Bass. Hello, Paul.
Thanks again.
And thank you for joining me to ask the tough questions. And next to Paul is Dr. Ed Joyner. And Dr. Joyner is an educator, and he's the head of Mayor-elect Harp transition team. Welcome, Dr. Joyner.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me.
You are welcome. It's the first time at my table. We have to change that after this, okay?
Okay, thank you.
I have to be able to invite you to come again. We want you to meet your mayor. You know, one of the things we heard during the election process, many people were complaining that they don't know Toni Harp. She has served in the legislature for 20 years, and she was very hardworking, representing New Haven to the fullest. But of course, because she wasn't necessarily visiting the neighborhoods, people are saying they don't know her. And tonight we're going to show you another side of Toni Harp, the side that is warm and caring and understanding, and we're going to learn a little about her childhood and her background. So, Toni, first thing I want to ask you, what would you like the people in New Haven to know about you most?
Well, I think that one of the things that they should know about me most is that I believe in them. That I think that New Haven is probably one of the most wonderful places in America to live, and that we have such a great, diverse community and so many opportunities to learn new things about each other that we wouldn't learn if we lived in communities with people who were just like us. And we have an urban area that is bustling. There are lots of things to do, and I love New Haven. So that's the most important thing.
Well, Toni, now you're about to become the mayor, and you went through the process of running, which is a challenge for anyone who goes through. You succeeded. And now you have a transition team. What's it like to be in transition? What you expected it to be? What are you doing these days?
Well, you know, I think one of the things that we actually had that I think gave us a step up is that Mayor DeStefano and the current staff at the City of New Haven prepared transition documents for us that gave us a snapshot of a certain place and time in which the city existed, and it was probably sometime around September. And each of the department heads talked about the positive things that they were doing, the things that they were most proud of, and then some of the other challenges that still had to be addressed and met. And so I think that actually gave us a foot ahead. I talked to one gentleman who had been the chief of staff for a town here in Connecticut, and the people who preceded them actually took the furniture with them when they left.
Wow.
And so
which can be a blessing sometimes, right? Depending on the furniture.
People trying to get new furniture.
So I think that we have actually, like a head start. And I have a great team, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from Dr. Joyner soon, but fabulous people who are working really hard to get into the meat of the city to try to understand how it currently operates, things that we might do to improve the operation and help us achieve some of the goals that I talked about during the campaign.
Okay, so you get this big report, and I saw it. It was 2 big boxes of binders, right?
Right.
How did you feel after reading it? When you came away from that, what was your conclusion about the government you're inheriting?
Well, I think that there are a lot of really interesting and good things going on in the city, and there still are a lot of challenges that need to be met. And those were pretty much outlined. And so I'm looking forward to the challenges, and I want to build upon those things that are positive and productive.
So what would be an example of something good that you read in there that you're glad is going on and you want to build?
Well, there's a lot of development going on. And as you know, the Coliseum site, for example, is something that is going on that is very good.
Right. The former New Haven Coliseum, there is a proposal to spend $395 million to make it like a new mini neighborhood.
Right, exactly. Some of the reentry work that is going on now is really very positive. But I think that in both cases in terms of development, because actually New Haven is a hot commodity these days in terms of development. But even the reentry work that we're doing can be built upon. And the development work that has occurred is mostly around the medical infrastructure that we have in our community and downtown, and that the challenge is to actually get out into the neighborhoods and begin to do some of that development out there. And so I think that's where we're challenging ourselves to make sure that we actually build the economies throughout our town and that we get jobs for New Haveners.
So Dixwell Avenue, Whaley Avenue, Grand Avenue, not just Church Street and Elm Street, is what you said.
That's right, Howard Avenue. And there are really great opportunities for development and building small businesses. So I'm really excited about that. There are a lot of efficiencies that we can begin to build. For example, we have a really outmoded IT structure in our town, and that was documented. No one's ashamed of the fact that we haven't really brought it up to 2007 or 2013 now we are standards. But in my junior high school, I was the only Black student
In the entire school.
in the entire school. And I'm a baby boomer, so it was a big school. And so in my high school, there were in my graduating class, I think in my class, there were 600 students, and there might have been 30 Black students. And there were maybe 60 Hispanic students. So we were...
There were more Hispanic students than there were
Yes.
Black students. What about your upbringing in Utah made you aware that you could become a state senator and mayor-elect?
Well, I think that I grew up as Baptist. I grew up in the Baptist church, and in our community, we had a strong sense of pride around our religion. And our religious tenets basically teach us that we are God's children and that we can do whatever it is that we feel we can achieve. And so I always believed that. And so I just operated from that no matter what I saw. I actually saw mistreatment as an African-American child in Utah, but then I saw white children who were poor mistreated too, so that I recognized that people mistreat people and you have to rise above it. The expectation is for everyone that you kind of find out who you are inside and you operate from that.
That's interesting because I was raised by my great-grandmother, and that's basically what she told me. I couldn't come with an excuse that I couldn't do something because for whatever reason, she didn't want to hear it. But you were raised by your grandmother.
I was raised by my grandmother. My mother was a teenager. She was a teenage mom, and my grandmother was in her second marriage. When she became pregnant, she was asked to leave the home. So she went to San Francisco to live with an aunt.
Your mother was asked to leave the home?
Yes, my birth mother. Mm-hmm. She went to San Francisco to live with an aunt. And so I was born in San Francisco. And she sent letters back saying that she really didn't feel she could take care of me. And so her mother, who I call my mother now, basically sent her sister by the railroad to pick me up, put me in a basket, and this is all biblical, Paul.
Right?
and
The
took me
female
back.
version of the Moses story.
Yes, right.
Yes.
And the railroad was just the Nile.
Right, that's right.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
In my mind, that's sort of how I programmed it, and I felt, and I was taken to Utah to live with my grandparents, and I lived with them until I was 5, at which time I was adopted, and
you were adopted by them.
by them.
Okay.
And so and which is really very good. And so I really love the fact that grandparents in our town sort of step up to the plate,
So they
because I've
told
had
you
that.
So you knew the story from your grandmother.
I knew the story, yes.
Did you feel any greater sense of, because of that, start, did you feel any greater sense that you had to achieve things as you grow up, like middle school, high school? Did you feel like you owed it to your grandparents or to yourself to be somebody special?
Well, I always felt that I was special, because in my mind, this is something that you hear in the Black church a lot. Many are called, but few are chosen. And I felt like I was chosen, that they decided they were going to take me. They didn't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did feel a sense of obligation. But more than that, they always told me that I was capable. So I just felt that I was capable and that I should do.
Toni, did you ever see your mom again?
Oh, yes. She became my oldest sister.
Really?
And
She came back to live there?
When I was about 8 years old, she came back to live in Utah. And my half siblings are actually still there. And we kind of grew up together, as I was their aunt and they were my
what was it like to
nieces and nephews.
interact with your mother when it wasn't clear with that, that she didn't
Because
have that?
the grandmother adopted
Was the
her,
authority,
so
yeah.
yes, you're not.
Well, she actually deferred all of the authority to my mother, or to her mother. And so it was always clear that she took the role of being the big sister. There was never competition.
No.
Yeah.
And isn't it striking how many grandmothers are raising children in New Haven now?
There are a lot of them who are doing that. And it's just such a wonderful thing for them to do. It really is. It makes all the difference in the world. And I love to tell them that I want to support them, and I want their grandchildren to know that they can become, at the time, I would say, a state senator or mayor, that there is really, your birth has nothing to do with what you accomplish.
That's so interesting, because at the same time, and I think we would all agree with that, at the same time you're in government, so often you're called on to help those people who have been dealt a bad hand at birth.
Right.
And that's kind of simultaneous messages you have to take on at the same time.
Yeah.
I want to ask Dr. Joyner, because we're talking about education and about, in fact, who inspire people. You grew up in the South, in the segregated South,
Mm-hmm.
and you're an educator, and you have a PhD, I take it.
Yes.
If you grew up in the segregated South, how did you know anyone a black person who had a PhD?
I knew black people that had PhDs in physics.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So
I knew black watchmakers, and I knew about the Tuskegee Airmen. And
now, who told you those things?
well, I was in a segregated school, and the mission of that school was to prepare children of African ancestry for service. And because we had no idea that the society would become as open as it has now, the idea was that we had to create our own institutions. In fact, there was a novel written by Sutton Griggs called Imperium and Imperio, where he talked about a nation within a nation. So you had black barbers, you had black morticians, you had black lawyers and doctors and whatever. And I came from a unique county, Pitt County, and there were 2 or 3 doctors, there were 2 or 3 lawyers, and
what state was this?
it's in North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah. And there were so many historical black colleges. So you knew college presidents. And I knew my history, in terms of what African Americans had contributed to American society from day one.
So where have you come down now after a whole career? Because you've worked so much in addressing urban education in the North. You've taught teachers. You've been a teacher. You've been a researcher with Dr. James Comer on how to improve schools. Where have you come down after all those cycles of debate on civil rights about which is better for the black community? to have its own solutions. Obviously, you want to be for segregation.
That's exactly
but in terms of what has been lost of those institutions you described from your youth, how do we move forward in a way that doesn't rely on segregation to build up a strong base within the Black community?
Well, I think it starts with the family. Toni's grandmother was probably the typical age of a grandmother. She wasn't 30 or 35 years old.
Right, she was older.
She was older and she was wiser. And both of us are about the same age. She's probably a lot younger than I am, but we're close in age. We listen to the same type of music, and we both were Baptists. And what I think has to happen is that our community has to take responsibility for those things that we do to ourselves that are counterproductive, even as we look at the things that institutions fail to do. And because I grew up in a segregated community, I never used what anyone else did as an excuse for me not doing what I needed to do. And I also reasoned that if African Americans had survived the Middle Passage, if they had survived the Civil War, and if they had survived all the racism and oppression that was predominant in the country, that they have to be special just to survive that. I mean, I did know something about Darwin.
Yes.
And so I reasoned that the only thing that would prevent me from doing as well as someone other than an African American would be my own work ethic. And in psychology, we call it locus of control. I never attributed any of my misfortunes to what white folks did, but always looked at what I had to do because we have to adapt.
Okay, so let me ask you a follow-up question to that, because as I listen to the both of you, one of the things, and I'm so glad Paul asked a question because it took me right to where I want to go. Given what you know, growing up in a segregated school and all the things that you were taught and self-reliance and Toni, the same thing, what do you think has been the trade-off, especially here in the Northeast, where so much emphasis is placed on integration, on making sure that Black children are sitting next to white children or Hispanic children, as the case might be? Do you see a trade-off? Have Black people lost something in integration in terms of self-reliance, in terms of knowing that they had to do for themselves rather than, society must do certain things?
I don't
understand my question.
I do understand. I don't think integration is a problem. I think that a shift in our worldview, because when you think about the gains that were made to make the society more open, the assumption was that if we created opportunities, that people would prepare themselves to take advantage of those opportunities. And so, if I used to tell my kids when I was a principal that if white people left the planet tomorrow, that wouldn't solve our problems if we ourselves didn't become more self-reliant. And I would also try to help them understand that white people don't keep you from going to the library. They don't keep you from studying at night. And they don't control how you dress and how you present yourself. And they don't control your public language. And so, I quite frankly, I find it very hard to understand why our parents allow their children to do certain things, to dress. I mean, they're your kids. So you don't leave the house with pajamas on to go to school. You don't have your pants hanging off you behind, and you don't use vulgar speech, particularly in public. I mean, as a kid, I'd probably say some things that I wouldn't want my parents to know that I said. But because we had a number of institutions working simultaneously on the same issues, we had the church, we had the home, we had the school, and we had a fictive kinship network, so that everybody in Toni's community, every adult felt responsible for her. And she felt a responsibility to them. And I wanted to make the older men in my community proud of me. I didn't want to be them ashamed of me. And I especially wanted my dad to be proud of me because he sacrificed so much to raise me. And my mother was the help.
So how are you going to use all that you have now to make a transition, make this transition team and make this team, this mayoralship or mayoral tenure different from what we have had in the last 20 years? We are constantly talking about school reform and somehow we can't seem to get it right.
Well, first of all, I think we have a mayor whose personal life experiences are nothing short of heroic. I mean, I get emotional when I think about what she had to go through.
You mean during this election?
I'm talking about what she had to go through as a person, from a child, baby, and she struggled. I mean, polio.
Oh yeah.
Born out of wedlock, living in a predominantly white community.
The only black child in the middle school.
Absolutely, and
So it's been about 400.
Well, what's that like to be 1 out of 400?
Well, you certainly know that you're different, but what you find out is that you have friends, and you find your own level. There were wonderful kids that I grew up with, and then there were some that were mean and nasty. But they weren't just mean and nasty to me. And since I was the only one that looked like me, then I had to really begin to think about all of that in a different context. And
in order to survive, and
in order to survive, and I managed, and I think I was better off for having had those struggles, to be honest with you. And so, and I think it gave me a different kind of worldview, and I realized that as a Black person, yes, I have some things that I had to deal with in terms of the lack of openness in our society, in terms of discrimination, and I had to face that. But I also saw poor white kids having to face it, even maybe to a greater extent than me. We were, basically...
Your parents had jobs.
They had jobs. We were never on welfare. And I was the youngest, so they had already... all the money that they were making now, they could spend on me. And so in many respects, economically, I was in a better place than many of the students that I went to school with. And I saw a lot of things, and I was able to say, well, I can feel sorry for myself, but look at Susie over there, who's never accepted because, her parents are poor, and who the other kids absolutely bully. And they never bullied me. And the other thing that is kind of relevant is that I grew up with boys. My cousins and my nephews were boys, and I was the only girl. And I was kind of a tomboy. So I did not allow people...
Play sports?
I was a good soccer player, yeah. I was, and a slightly good at basketball.
You were playing soccer back when we were kids, I guess.
It was a different kind of soccer. It was almost like baseball. Remember kick soccer?
You're right, you're right. And actually ran the bases.
Because I remember thinking it was kind of weird later on when people started thinking in soccer.
Yes.
okay.
Sorry.
So I want Paul to get a chance to ask his political question, but I want to ask you this. When did you know that you were going to go to college? Now, you graduated from Yale Graduate School, and many people don't know that you're also a Yale graduate and that you have a master's degree from Yale. But when you were in high school in Utah, was college a sort of natural progression for you? Did your mother sit you down, your grandmother who adopted you, sit you down and say, you're going to go to college because?
One of the backstories is that my father actually went to Utah because he was a dark-skinned Black person, and he wanted to go to college. So he went there because during those days, during the 40s, the early 40s, they had quota systems in white schools in the Midwest and in some parts of the South, so they would only let in so many Black people. Because he was dark-skinned, he didn't want to go to the traditionally Black schools because they had what they call paper bag tests.
Yes.
And he said to me, I will never be more discriminated against by my own people.
What's a paper bag test?
It's the paper bag principle. It's about certain parts of the Black society, like at Howard University and Lincoln High School in DC, where there are parties, and you as a Black person, if you went, and if your shade wasn't lighter than the paper bag, you couldn't go in.
That sounds kind of self-hating. No?
Oh,
I'm sorry. We have Jewish people had it too with the noses. Yeah. I guess every culture has it.
Yes.
It is internalized oppression, Paul. And it's not just unique to black people.
Right, it's to every
There's
group.
color prejudice in every group across the world.
Yes, class.
Another kind of prejudice.
So
he wanted to go to college. He wanted to actually be an engineer. And because he got married, had kids, he really couldn't fulfill that dream. But for all of his kids, that's what he wanted for me. Now, one of my sisters actually went to college and was the second African American to ever graduate from University of Utah. My aunt, on my mother's side, was the first person to graduate, African American to graduate in the state from Utah State University.
Wow.
And so these were the women that I wanted to emulate, that I was pushed to emulate. I never had a decision about going to college. It was expected that I would.
Where did you go?
So I went to University of Utah for a couple of years, and then I finished at Roosevelt University in Chicago.
So being the first, you're not the first to be a first in your family.
No, I'm not.
And how does that now inform you both have such rich background. My goodness, how does that inform you handling the transition, you stepping into this role, given all the wonderful things as well as the challenges New Haven has?
Well, I think
how is that going to inform the decisions you make and the people you select for your administration?
Well, I think that what it does is that it makes me value everybody. That I know if I can get to where I've gotten to in my life, given where I started, anyone who started there or higher or lower can get to where they want to get to. And so I'm going to have policies that actually help people do that and demand that the people who serve the people in New Haven have the same value for them that I have for them, that I have for myself.
I think also when you study historical movements where people have been uplifted, it wasn't just the people themselves. And I think I can speak for myself, and I'm sure Toni has similar stories. Gene Vitale, Gerald Tarazi, the late Sal Verderam, Emma Ruff, Mike Wangillo, these were all people that helped me.
You're mentioning people who were administrators in the New Haven
Right. When I was a young teacher, they were people that helped me, and I could not have made it without their help. And if you look at the Black struggle, there were whites that died in that struggle. Swerner and Goodman are examples. James Reeb.
Although no one talks about Cheney too much in that. You ever notice?
Well, I think people in the know talk about him because they talk about the three civil rights workers, and clearly Cheney was one. And then people like Abraham Heschel and Dr. King. So it has really been a movement that is based on e pluribus unum. And Toni probably is a representative of that more than anyone. She's an African-American female, but she also worked in an atmosphere where many of the people in power are white males, but yet she has earned their respect, their admiration. And I think that she brings that same thing here to New Haven, where she unifies the city and continues to build on what has already been created in New Haven.
So I think part of what Nzingo's getting at, so now you have to make some decisions, let's say, about school reform. You've spent your career, and you've spent a lot of your career, too, looking at education and seeing what works and what doesn't. New Haven's experimenting with a lot of ideas. Do we have it right? Are you guys going to come in and say,
we have miles to go before we sleep?
So it would be, like, specifically, we've tried in New Haven having nonprofit charters manage schools. We've tried giving principals traditional schools, but where they get to fire all the teachers and hire their own.
Well, that's just limited reform. The bottom line is that the system has to be built around the needs of the kids. And Mayor-elect Harp's notion of early childhood education, we need to really get down there and see what's going on, and also to make sure the parents take advantage of it. I mean, if a kid is not coming to kindergarten, that's not the child's fault. And so she can use the bully pulpit to help some of these young mothers understand that they have responsibilities as well. It's really the jockey and the horse. And I think also that in a test-driven culture, oftentimes you neglect to develop the skills like writing effectively. Independent reading is something that should be done in school, but it also should be done at home. And then when you look at the fact that the kid is only in school 6 hours for 180 days out of the year, you got 185 days where they're doing something else. You also have 18 hours where they're doing something else. And the kids, minority children and poor children who achieve are the ones who do things beyond the school day.
So you're saying school reform isn't just the school day.
It's the tail wagging the dog.
And a lot of your career you spent with Dr. Comer talking about how schools become part of a broader community. Right. And the school day doesn't end when the bell rings.
Absolutely. I mean, think about your own development. Didn't you read beyond school?
Yeah, I never stopped reading.
Yeah, and I didn't either. And so it takes the same formula that you use is the formula that these children have to use. They have to read a great deal more. They have to be intellectually curious. They have to cooperate with their teachers.
Now, how do we do this in this culture? And Toni, you see this when people come up to hearings in Hartford, this culture where they want to say test, test, test. We're going to decide they have these high stake tests. The new Common Core test, now they're stating 7 weeks they're spending to just have their kids try to do well on a test. The teacher's salary is going to be based on the test. How do you do what Dr. Joyner was talking about?
She can answer after we let people know that you're watching OneWorld Civic Engagement Program. We are talking this evening about our new mayor-elect. We're talking to our new mayor-elect and the head of her transition team. So the former State Senator Toni Harp, now mayor-elect of New Haven, Toni Harp, and Dr. Ed Joyner, the head of her transition team. And we're looking at the challenges she faces as she takes the reign of government from a mayor who has been there for 20 years. And particularly the challenge she faces in the education system and being inspired by a remarkable upbringing and background, as well as Dr. Joyner's, who told us he grew up in a segregated South, but he knew that he could not use color as an excuse for failure. And they're going to bring their first-hand experience to the table. And Paul Bass is here with me asking questions, and Paul is asking them, how are they going to handle education reform now, as we seem to take one step forward and two steps backwards.
And I was interested in specifically in this pressure you hear a lot about from teachers, administrators, and children about tests. Ed Joyner was just talking about the need to encourage other skill development, reading. How are we going to navigate that with ed reform?
Well, I think that for a long time we erred on the other side, which is that we really didn't know exactly what it is that we were producing. Now the pendulum has swung and we are probably doing too much testing. So we're really basically going to have to find a way to engage kids after school in doing some of those things that we know actually builds the capacity in the child, that gives them an opportunity to read and to discuss things, that gives them an opportunity to work with people in the community who maybe aren't the professionals who are in school during the school day, that support
like
their
Raven reads the kind of
that kind of stuff, like maybe getting grandparents who don't have grandchildren to come in and work with kids and read with them, to find ways and resources to actually have an extended before school day and after school day.
You talked about your proposal. You said, why don't we take Lincoln Bassett School, a
Right.
K-8 school in New Hallville? Why don't we turn that to a pre-K to 8, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. school?
Like what they do in Bridgeport, the 6 school in Bridgeport.
That's right. That's exactly it. And the reason that I think that we should do that is that we still have a school day that is based upon a manufacturing reality and parents who work in manufacturing jobs. Most parents work from 9 to 5 or they work from 7 to 3. And so we don't accommodate families at all. And I think that's one of the things that schools have really got to do. They've got to understand, where are they? What is going on with the families there? Are we supporting the families by what we do, or are we making it more difficult for families? When I lived downtown in Linwood Place, and I would walk in the mornings, at 6:30 I would go walking, and I would see moms with little babies waiting for buses to take their kids different places so they could get to work on time. And, oftentimes the school wasn't accommodating that. later, when I would go to work, and if I would go to work late, let's not tell the people I worked for at the time, I would see little boys, adolescents, roaming through my neighborhoods without anybody really paying much attention to them, only to discover that some of them who'd been suspended or expelled had 2-hour opportunities to learn with someone who would come and meet them at the library. That doesn't work for a community. That doesn't work for their education. And we've got to find a way to have an education system that actually realizes that they're part of the community and have to work with the community around some of their the ways in which they operate.
I'm hearing the word community school. That's the phrase that seems to be popping up in the air here. Because I know that Dr. Comer at Yale was a pioneer in this idea a half century ago that we should have community schools that are open early, open late, combine the school and teach. We tried that. And you know why, when you worked with Dr. Comer, was there a look at why in New Haven we had that in West Rock, we had that in other neighborhoods, and then we didn't have that?
Well, it worked for one thing, but unfortunately, education in this era is driven by fads.
Yes.
And you have too many people who are not educators making decisions. You talk about norm reference testing. When Alfred Binet developed the IQ test, he did not develop it to punish anybody. He developed it to do the same thing that a doctor would do. So if your leg is broken, you're not going to be criticized for a broken leg. You have to fix the leg. And then there's an element in this country, a sort of conservative element in this country, that wants a quick and dirty way of measuring school success. In fact, I wish we applied the same standards to how they create policy and see how that would play out, and probably ask for SAT scores and all that other stuff.
So is that what happened at community schools?
Well, what happened is that the classical tried, tested, and true stuff got discarded because of the fad nature of education and the profit margin. You have to understand, testing is a multi-billion-dollar business. And it's in somebody's best interest to do a lot of testing. And tests have to be by nature quick and dirty, because if I want to teach a kid to do what you do with the New Haven Independent, that means that I have to teach the kid how to write grammatically correct. I have to teach the kid how to critically respond to text, how to think critically, and how to use standard language. And so you start measuring schools on test scores alone, then what gets measured gets done. So now you're going to have teaching, and then you're going to have the rampant cheating that you've had in places all over the country, specifically in places.
So you think it was testing and fads that killed community schools?
I think so. I think testing, fads, and de-emphasis on the fundamentals. And here's another one. This may sound, and I don't know if I have time to really explain it, but the notion of social promotion. We ought to be able to identify kids early on who are at risk of not learning to read by age 3. And we ought to say that they need more time to learn. And we also ought to give them the opportunity. Some children may need to go to summer school. They may need to go to school more often. And they need to have the best teachers. In surgery, you get the best surgeon. But oftentimes we put the most experienced teachers in front of the most difficult kids. And so we ought to be able to do that. I think it's been done in pockets in New Haven, but the bottom line is that the system has to wrap itself around the child. And knowing Mayor Harp, I'm sure that she'll be in the hospital as soon as they're born with a book and an admonition to the parents to say, listen, if you want your child to grow up, if you want this little girl to grow up like the 2 women on this panel, then you don't start preparing for the SAT when they're in the 9th grade. You start at birth. And you have to have books in the home. If you can have Xbox in the home, you can have a book in the home. If you can take a kid to a basketball game, you can take them to Barnes and Nobles. And that's on us.
Dr. Joyner, here is my question. As you talk about that, as Paul said, he heard Toni talking about community. He heard you talking about community schools. Most of the changes that have been made recently, not only in New Haven, New Haven got a lot of bounce from its education reform in its theoretical reform and the agreements between the union and all that. But I'm not sure so far how much that is manifest in results, okay, in terms of the schools and the rankings and all this. So my question is, how, as you plan this transition with Mayor-elect Harp, how are you going to use your experience to give parents a voice? Because I don't think we can have effective education reform without input from families. As you said, you see parents at 6:30 in the morning taking buses with babies. We need to hear from, whether it be the parents' union or whoever it is who's speaking for parents. Don't you think we need to hear from these people in order to have effective reform?
Well, you do, and that's what the COMA program is all about. It's about parents as the children's first teachers, and it's about parents working hand in hand with teachers. But you have to have some guidelines. In other words, you don't go into school and be just simply a critic. That there are things that teachers need from parents and children in order to do their job. The first thing is cooperation. It's very hard to teach defiant children, and it's impossible to teach kids that don't show up.
Right.
And so you have to have robust attendance policies, and you have to try to get it right in the early years so that you build momentum for the next years. And you also have to have an intensive care program for children who come from severely disadvantaged backgrounds. And it's not just the school's job. Because of Toni's experience working with a wide range of agencies, it becomes possible now to converge all of that effort and to combine some of the efforts so that the social services, the mental health services, the medical service, all those things are brought to bear on helping the child to succeed and educating parents.
Yes, that is key. But you know what? I have to get Paul to ask this next question.
Because I was asking, when you bring up your experience working with that, a lot of things people don't know about you, Toni, is that your day job for so many years has been working on homelessness.
Right. Yes, I've worked for the Cornell Scott Hill Health Center, and actually Cornell Scott was one of the people that actually influenced me, that really believed and worked very hard to make sure that everyone had access to quality health care, quality primary care, way before his time, way before, the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare. And so one of the things that he saw as a problem in our community was homeless people. If you don't have a home, the last thing in the world that you're going to think about is your health. And so about 26 years ago, I went to work for him to do a healthcare to the homeless program. And basically what we do is we go out to the shelters, the soup kitchens, and we actually have a clinic at Columbus House. We have another clinic at Grant Street Partnership. And over time, I worked with CMHC
to build Connecticut Mental Health Center. Yeah,
Connecticut Mental Health Center, to build a substance abuse treatment program at Grant Street for homeless men that had a shelter component, and homeless women during the day. And over time, working with Esther Armand, we built a drug detox center, Esther Armand, Cornell Scott, and now it's over on Cedar Street, so that we built a whole system of access for people from the homeless all the way through the continuum of people who didn't have access to regular health care.
And I remember when you were an alderwoman in the late 1980s, you had co-authored a plan to try to deal with homelessness, because people don't remember, a generation ago, our government was not addressing the issue.
Right.
And I guess out of that was where we got some of those networks of shelters and support services.
We did. Actually, I won the race for alderman against an incumbent and wasn't supposed to win, and I got punished. My punishment was to be the chair of the ad hoc committee on homelessness. But it was really a great opportunity because we had to site shelters. We had people living, remember 10th City on the Green? We had them in hotels. And so we had to find ways in which to get people at least temporary housing. And one of the things that we did was we went from neighborhood to neighborhood, because every neighborhood, it was NIMBY. It was the first time I heard that, not in my backyard. Mm-hmm. And we finally found an area of the city that said They can come, but we've got to be a part of the advisory board.
Which part was that?
And that's when we first sited Grant Street.
Oh, in the Hill.
In the Hill. And so the guys that were there shoveled the walks of the people in the neighborhoods, helped do cleanups, did things with the neighborhood. And the neighborhood folks at that time, Johnny Martinez was the first director. At that time, they had a wonderful relationship that has continued. And they worked together on each other's issues.
Okay, as we only have less than 10 minutes left in the program. So I want to ask you, Toni, tell people, as you take on this daunting challenge, what do you need from the people of New Haven? How can you have, without question, a wealth of knowledge and information and experience. What can people in New Haven do to help you and Mr. Joyner to have not only a successful tenure for you, but a successful mayoral function that's going to benefit all of New Haven?
So one of the things that I said, and I really mean, is that together we will move New Haven forward. And that means that I want to know the minds of the people who live in New Haven. So in that regard, we do have the transition team. We have a number of subcommittees, and there are people who are not on the transition team that are helping with that. But we also have our website, finally, Paul, yes, it finally came. It's up and going, and it's, I believe it's harptransition.com. Right? And so if you go to www.harptransition.com. If you have ideas about how you think our city can be made better, how departments can become more efficient, then there's a place there for you to add that. We will consider it. It will get full airing. When we have public meetings, we want you to come out. No idea isn't worth us hearing. There are no bad ideas, and there are things that we want to weigh and consider, and there may be things that all of you know that we don't know that will help us. And so I want people to feel like this is their city, and that they can actually, their minds, their thoughts, their creativity can actually help us move the city forward. I really believe that. And I believe that's how I'm different. That's what makes me different, because I believe that. I think that New Haven is ready. It's matured enough to actually have a real democracy where people can come in, have opinions, and have them taken into consideration and feel like they can do that and like they'll be valued.
Okay, here is a reality we have to deal with. Mm-hmm. During this campaign, there are just some really ugly stuff that went on.
Yes.
And yeah, but here's the thing. That's reality. These people live in New Haven, many of them. And you have to deal with them going forward. Now, you want people to bring ideas, etc. But what are you going to do to neutralize, or maybe neutralize is not the right word, but what are you going to do to redirect the negative energy, from some people? How are you going to redirect that negative energy so that it can be harnessed in a positive way?
Well, I think that, first of all, whether people supported me or not, whether or not they think I'm a decent person or not, I believe they have something to offer, and I believe they care about this place. And we have to function with them from that place. That's where we meet together. And I don't automatically think, because you didn't necessarily think that I was the best person for mayor, that I don't want to hear you. Absolutely, I want to hear you. And I want you to know that I value the fact that you love this place like I do, and that you want the best for it. And I'm the mayor, I'm the reality now, but I'm willing to work with you and to hear your point of view. And let's work together to make this place even better than it already is.
Time for another question?
Yes, you do.
This is kind of more micro. Something that I've noticed even more following around the campaign and since is how much hungrier New Haven is. I mean, am I missing that?
No,
we went
hungry.
to that food giveaway in the Hill, and there were a lot more people than there were 6 months before. Thanksgiving turkeys, people were just lined up. Now they're about to cut food stamps more.
Yes.
What do we? Yeah, well, now they cut it again. In Washington, Democrats and Republicans are talking about how much more to cut food stamps. What's going on and what are we going to do?
People are really hungry, and I didn't really notice it until I started going around. We would take food to our senior developments, to our senior housing, and we would open it up. It would be reasonably good. We tried to have at least some fruits, vegetables, and some protein.
Yep, I remember you had them.
And you'd look around and it would be gone.
And the lines were longer.
And the lines were longer.
Yeah.
I worked for the city 27 years ago, and there was a hunger problem then. There was a study done on hunger. I think if we did a hunger study today, it would be even worse. And so it is a city issue. You can't do good work in school if you don't have good nutrition, if you're hungry. You do things as an individual that you wouldn't do if you were fed, if you're hungry. And so it really is a problem that we've got to solve. And that if I can use the bully pulpit, if I can get folks to donate, our foundations to work with us on us, then that's what I'm going to do. But I'm also going to go to Washington and say, you people who think people don't need resources to help them eat are dead wrong.
Absolutely. That's why she's a hero.
Thanks. Dr. Joyner, as the head of this transition team, what's your main goal? What do you want to achieve, to help her to achieve?
To create a structure so that the multiple voices in the city can be heard, and also create some guiding principles so that people will understand that if you're only bringing anger to the table, that's not helpful. If you have the heart to help, you can criticize. I don't want to plagiarize, so that's Abraham Lincoln. And that you have a leader who is open, supportive, forgiving, but she's also relentlessly in search of solutions to help people. This is a lady that overcame polio. She overcame being born out of wedlock. She overcame being a woman, a black woman in a predominantly white male environment. And so she's a warrior. But she's a merciful warrior. and I believe that what the transition team wants to do is to carry out her vision, to bring everybody to the table in an effort to try to move this.
Now, specifically what you're doing, if I understand correctly, is you're vetting people who might have jobs in the administration. Mm-hmm. You're looking over the books that Mayor-elect Harp talked about that are going department by department, see what the problems are, mm-hmm. and you're planning an inauguration.
Well, right. And obviously money drives everything. Everything we want to do has a price tag. And so clearly more efficient government, if we can get support beyond public funds, then we want to have that.
Has anything, Joe, can you give me a specific of something that surprised you in this transition process about what's going on in city government, something you didn't know before?
Well, I knew it intellectually, but it hit me emotionally that New Haven really is almost fed upon by surrounding towns because it has hospitals, it has universities,
and magnet schools.
Magnet schools, and it's the cultural capital of this state. And so everybody benefits from those institutions. But then the public funds that support those, the pilot money is not sufficient.
Payment in lieu of taxes that the state sends us for taxes and property. And
that we have such a small proportion of our buildings as taxable property that's a structural problem.
And that's not a new structural problem.
It's not new, but I don't know if the public understands it as well as they should. And we really are a donor city. Think about it. I mean, if we charge people coming here to use hospitals, to come on the green and to hear great artists and to use museums and so on and so forth, that'd be one thing. But, we're a donor city. And so we need the resources. Mario Cuomo said that city is synonymous with civilization. You could not have civilization until you brought people together.
So nuts and bolts, what will that mean? Will it mean greater lobbying in Hartford? Will it mean
I think that's a question.
More?
That's a question for the mayor-elect. But if you look at her past history, clearly she has made that very clear to everybody, and she has actually done a phenomenal job, despite the tensions between the city and the state government in the past, to get as many resources And her statement about going to Washington, D.C., she's going to do it. And that's the only thing we can do to try to make a difference, because there are deep structural challenges.
You have the last one.
Well, and I was just going to say on that note, we've got to have a grants office and a development office in City Hall. We don't have one now, and we really do need it.
Yes, it's difficult for a city, as he said, it's a donor city, New Haven city that everybody comes to get things and leave. The magnet schools do a phenomenal job, but unfortunately more children who come from the suburbs benefit than those who live in New Haven. And the grants and development offices is really, really key.
It's really key. But I think that we are creative, we're innovative, and I believe that we can find ways to solve our problems and use the fact that we're a donor, the donor, as a way to actually get more of the resources that we need here.
Well, I thank you so much. Thank you, Paul. As we say here at OneWorld, it is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And I like what Dr. Joyner said. And, and what you said, you're meeting people where they are, and you're asking them to contribute ideas and to commit with you on this journey to make New Haven a better place, because it has a lot to offer. And we certainly want to go forward in a very, very positive way. We are going to show you a very short video of some of the history of New Haven. And we're also going to show you images of New Haven City Hall and some of the wonderful schools that we have in New Haven. And that with these two people working together with a lot of you in the community, they're going to make these really wonderful places for the people who live in New Haven, not just people who come to visit. We are glad you join us for this civic engagement program. And after the credits and these images, we say good night.